Did you get to watch the draft or check it out at all? Or were you busy
Oh
all
yeah,
weekend?
absolutely. It's more or less a holiday for me.
Yes.
Especially I personally I love the first round. The first round's a blast because they're the biggest names, obviously, out of all of these guys. But day two is what I enjoy the most because typically that is the biggest fantasy impact is on day two. So that's what I really enjoy the most. And from day one and day two, I didn't miss a second. I had to miss some of day three. My daughters, they had a t-ball game, so I'm coaching their team, so I missed some of day three. But I didn't miss a second on the first 2 days.
That's awesome though. Like anytime you actually get to coach like any kids in sports, like I think that's just like, pride and joy, especially when you're into sports as much as, people like we are.
Oh, it's a blast. But my daughters are 4 and 6 and they're both on the team. And so it's like herding cats because, it's a bunch of 4 to 6 year olds. They're all over. Like one kid, like one girl on the team, she'll come up to me like all the time and she'll be like, "Hey coach. Yeah. Can I go tell my mom I love her?" "Sure, go tell your mom you love her." Hey, coach, your shoes look really nice. "Thanks, I appreciate it." And then I have one other kid's like running the other kids over, like trying to get to the ball. Like it doesn't matter if it was hit to him or not. He will get, so he's like ripping it out of other kids' gloves, and just the spectrum of all of these different kids and where they're at is pretty enjoyable.
That's what I heard I used to do. Like we're sitting there, like a kid would catch it, but like he would mess up on the last throw. So I'm like, just give it to me. And I'd run over and try to take it out of his hand. Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about because I used to get criticized for that on a regular basis.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
You ready to kick this episode off?
Let's do it, man.
All right, let's go. Where are we? There we go.
This is Fantasy Intervention. Now here to intervene with your fantasy life, Chase Vernon.
Oh, yes. Welcome on into yet another episode of Fantasy Intervention coming at you hot and heavy. Another Wednesday night. Oh, man. I couldn't do this by myself. I just could not break down the NFL draft by myself. I had to have Garret Price from Dynasty Nerds come and hop in with me. What's going on, Garret? How you doing, man?
Oh, man, I'm doing good. I freaking love the draft. I really do. Even I know there's people that were disappointed with some of the landing spots and whatnot this year. Like I didn't care. Like even if you tell me it was a bad Christmas, it was still Christmas. Like it was a good day.
It was a little bit rough. Like some of these picks were just like kind of mind blowing, right? Like sitting there and like having these this wishful thinking for landing spots, and all of a sudden they just bomb and go to like a really off spot. It was like kind of heartbreaking to an extent.
It was well, and we got so spoiled last year too. Like last year, there were so many good landings, like especially the running backs. It was like, oh, you go to Kansas City. Oh, you go to the best offensive line with the Colts. Oh, you go to, Lamar Jackson. You got like all these guys got such great landing spots last year. And then this year it's like, all right, this guy gets a bad offensive line. This guy has to compete for touches. Like, it's tough by comparison for sure.
Well, I know, for example, your favorite running back in this draft class, according to your rankings, was Javonte Williams. Was that prior to or after him landing with the Broncos?
Both. So I have my rankings have not changed much at all since I've done my pre-draft scouting. And part of that was because even though landing spot, yes, to an extent does matter, for me, it's more talent, draft capital, then landing spot is the least significant for me. And I know other people value that a little bit higher, but part of the reason I ended up kind of getting to that point was I did a study. I think I put it on Twitter too. But basically, I went back 2 years. I looked at 2 years ago's draft class, and guys like Miles Sanders and AJ Brown and DK and all those guys were in that class. And 8 of those 11 players have drastically different situations than they did just 2 years ago. So I think landing spot affects redraft much more significantly than it does dynasty, just because of how quickly the NFL landscape can change.
Yeah, didn't you put up a tweet about that or something recently? Which,
Yeah.
by the way, real quick, before we actually go into your tweet, let everybody know where they can find you, man. Let them know where they can, find your rankings, all the content, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on Twitter at Dynasty Price. And all of my work is at Dynasty Nerds. I've been very fortunate to be on that podcast for a little over 2 years now, which is crazy that it's been that long. I've also been fortunate enough to actually, be a part owner of the company now and do a lot of different things, from our nerd score that we put together to helping build the film room. And, I didn't have much of a hand in this, but I think it's the best thing that we do is the GM tool that you can just plug all your teams in, and you can see at a quick glance what teams are doing well, what teams are struggling, especially if you're in 2 or 3 leagues, like it's nice, it's helpful. But if you're like me and you're in like 15 leagues, 20 leagues, like it's almost a necessity to just even sort of organize your thoughts, especially if you're on like some are on Sleeper, some are on MFL, some are like it can be tough. So that really helps organize everything for you very nicely.
I actually used the GM tool earlier today because I'm in a tight end premium league, but this is like a super tight end premium league, right? Like it's triple the amount of points per reception that you get for a tight end versus like a wide receiver. So I'm stockpiling tight ends because these fools don't know how valuable. They don't know how valuable it is.
3 points?
No. So it's half point PPR. So you're getting 1.5.
Wow.
But still, like it's a lot. And these fools are they're looking at it like it's a normal tight end premium league. And I'm like, no, this is like super premium tight end league. And they're sitting there and you're looking at like Hawkins. Jonnu Smith would have been a wide receiver too if he was a wide receiver last year. That's how much value you're getting from these players. So I'm like, man, who has some weak tight ends? So I go into Dynasty GM, and part of the tool was like, hey, you can actually go in and look at who has a weak tight end, group.
Yeah.
So instead of me going through and trying to search through each team and trying to remember all that, because I'm in the middle of like 2 rookie drafts as well, I just went in, I looked at who's the weakest tight ends, and I sent offers out to the 3 weakest tight ends, which actually ties into the rankings of Dynasty Nerds and the rankers that do stuff over there. So It's an excellent tool. It's something that I definitely encourage everybody to go grab over there at Dynasty Nerds. But my favorite thing is like the film room that you guys do over there. Like it crushes it. The nerd score is amazing, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But I do love that film room where you can actually break down and watch clips of your players in there. But with all that being said, we did have an NFL draft. I do want to dive into the NFL draft. I want to make sure that we're sitting there and we're covering a lot of these players. So if you do have questions about certain players, certain rookies, please line them up in the chat. Don't be afraid. Just throw your questions out there. I know Jacob has some himself, especially about, I guess you're 212 in the mock on the podcast the other day. I told him to come in and ask you himself, see if he actually does or not. So with that being said, was there anything that stood out for you in the draft, a certain team maybe, or a certain pick that you really liked? Like, what was the most exciting part of the draft for you? What did you come out of this draft really thinking overall?
Yeah, one of the biggest takeaways for me personally was the quarterbacks. We have such a strong quarterback class. The fact that the first 3 picks were all quarterbacks, like that just doesn't happen. And I think we take it for granted because we do see early picks taken at quarterback often at 101, and sometimes even, we might have back-to-back at 102 as well. But we had 3 straight. We had another guy in Justin Fields that many would argue, and I would probably be in that group, are just as good, if not better, than the guys taken at 2 and 3. And even Mac Jones, like if you were to put Mac Jones today in next year's class, he would be competing for the number 1 overall quarterback in the class. So we have 5 guys that are very, very talented players. And all of them went to spots where you're like, yeah, I could see there being good fantasy success. They've had success in the past, or there's weapons there to work with, or, different things like that. So I think the quarterback, I think this was really the year of the quarterback more than anything else. Oh, I think you're muted, Chase.
Oh yeah, sorry, my bad. I was actually trying to type some things out, some answers to some questions. But no, it's funny that you say that because I'm sitting there and I actually picked up in a one quarterback league, which I know is like unheard of now. It's like oh my God, you play
That
one
relic.
I have been playing this league for like 7 years now. It's a $500 high stakes league, and I took at the 112, I took Trevor Lawrence, and then at the 207, I took Justin Fields, just because the value that was there for these quarterbacks and how both of them could end up as top 6 quarterbacks here in a couple years.
Absolutely,
is like almost unheard of in a draft. And all of a sudden, I'm getting them at 112 and 206 or 207, and I have Justin Herbert on top of that. So you can actually kind of turn and burn on these quarterbacks versus like the wide receivers. Dude, you only had a handful of them that ended up in spots that you wanted to see them in. So it's kind of funny how, this draft actually worked itself out, especially with the running back position.
Yeah.
So did you have a certain guy, and we brought it up briefly, I think you might want to bring up Williams. I don't know or not. But is there a certain guy that really took off for you in this draft where, I feel great about his landing spot. I already loved him already. I'm going to be drafting him everywhere.
I'm a huge Javonte Williams fan. And this was, somebody asked me the other day, they're like, your favorite guy at the running back position was Javonte, and your favorite guy at the wide receiver position was Devonta Smith. Are you just a contrarian? Like, or do you just like to be, like getting at everybody? And I was like, no. They're like, well, I remember last year you like, Jonathan Taylor over CEH. You were right, but are you just wanting to like always argue? Is that your goal? And I'm like, no, that's not my goal. But I really do try to just focus solely on what's up, Taylor? How's it going, man? I really do try to just focus on what I see on tape. And obviously there's other factors that go into it. There's, injury history. There's the off the field stuff. So tape isn't the only factor, but it really, if I were to put it on a grade scale, it would be somewhere between 70 and 80% of my value in a certain player is how I break them down on film. And all of the major guys, I'm watching at least 6 games, and most of them were somewhere between 8 and 10 games each on all of those guys. Some of the lesser guys, it was 4 or 5 games, but those main guys especially, I'm really digging in. I'm watching some all 22 on these guys, which that's something I'm excited about for next year. We had some all 22 in the film room this year. It kind of came in later in the game. Next year, that's going to be our main focus. So well over half of the film that'll be in the film room next year will be all 22, which will be sweet.
Dude, you're just gonna be a little excited, man. Like, I might have to go off air for a minute now.
A little bit of blood flow just now.
Ooh, so much blood flow. No, but sitting there and looking at it, man, it's exciting to see some of these players end up in certain spots. I thought that the Devonta Smith pick was very intriguing. Thought that Jalen Waddle, ending back with his previous quarterback was interesting as well. We have Jamar Chase, who goes back with his quarterbacks. We have 3 wide receivers that ended up with their previous quarterbacks. I'm a little bit curious how the Waddle chemistry is going to work out after Waddle sit there and said that Mac Jones was a better quarterback than Tua. But, hopefully, everything is flawless over there for the most part. Now,
that was funny.
Oh, man, that's brutal that all of a sudden he's going to go back and play with a quarterback that he didn't like as much. I mean.
Yeah. How do you explain your way out of that? Like, oh, man, like, you're my boy. It's just I was trying to get him to win the Heisman and stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, trying to get him drafted. But I like you more. I really do like you more. I swear, man. It's like 2 best friends go back and forth. Yeah. Oh, I love it. Love it. All right. So the thing is, like, all right. So at Dynasty Nerds, you and I both rank, right? And it was kind of crazy because you and I don't talk very often about rankings or anything like that. We'll have, engagements from here to there, but it's nothing as to where like, we're sitting there comparing our rankings or talk about, oh, who do you have higher? Who do you have higher? But I went through our rankings tonight before our show. Today before our show. And I was sitting there and I was doing a little bit of comparisons, and we're pretty much on par with like everybody. And I'm talking about not even rookie drafts. I'm talking about full on startup drafts. We're within 15 spots with every rookie player.
Wow.
So yeah, I was actually really, really impressed overall at your taste. So sitting there and looking at it, the first big one that I came across that we didn't have as much of an agreement on was Elijah Moore.
Okay.
You had him at 71. I had him at 110. So that's obviously a pretty big discrepancy when we talk about, almost 40 picks. I have never been that big of a fan of Elijah Moore. I think he has too many flaws as a whole, but he went to the Jets relatively early.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm in a rookie draft, right, and I'm looking at Elijah Moore at the 202-ish range, early second, maybe late first.
Yeah, depending on if it's super flex or 1 QB. But yeah, I think in super flex, you're looking at, right around 202. Yeah, I think that's about right.
All right, I would never take him at 202. So I want you to sell me on Elijah Moore as to why I should take him at the 202. Like, we're sitting there, we're looking at a different system coming in, obviously, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Elijah Moore kind of just, like, he kind of reminds me of a smaller version of Brandon Ayuk to an extent. He's even a little bit faster, he has that breakaway speed. But I can't buy into Elijah Moore yet. So tell me why you would go with Elijah Moore so early.
Yeah, so here's my take on Elijah Moore.
Taylor had a hot take.
Oh, what did he say?
Sorry to interrupt. Taylor said, I love Elijah Moore, but traded my only share for Jameis.
Woof. Hopefully it's Superflex.
No, I'm sure it is. But go ahead. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to read off Taylor's take.
When I dug into his tape, it's funny because I do a lot of Devy work. So I'm just realizing like how dark it is in my yeah. I don't know why it's so dark in here right now. I have my lights on. I don't know what's going on. Anyway, sorry about that. I got really distracted. I was like, why is it so dark?
It's just because I'm so light. That's all.
Maybe that's what it is. I'm going to have to fix my lighting in here. This is disgusting. All right. Anyway, when I watched him play, I didn't know a lot about him going in. He was a guy that I had heard of just because I play Devy, but I hadn't really watched a lot of tape. So he ended up being one of the later players that I really watched and dug into his stuff. And I kind of came in like you try to be as neutral as you can because sometimes your preconceived notions and feelings going into watching tape can affect your scores and different things like that. And you see him through either, rose-colored glasses or you see him through like, this guy sucks. But going into watching him, I was like, he's another small, speedy receiver. Like, I don't know. I'm not a big, small, speedy receiver guy. So I was kind of already like, meh, going into it. And I started watching him and I walked away extremely, extremely impressed. What I saw as far as being able to get off the line, he did things well in the slot and on the outside. Very, very good route runner, very good footwork. Wasn't afraid to go up over the middle and make contested catches. That's something that is a knock for a lot of these smaller, speedy guys. Is like, okay, lots of seams, lots of curl routes, lots of screens, but they're not going over the middle and making the big contested catch or, trying to find the sticks and different things like that. Like he was able to do all of those things at either a good or a great level for most of the things that I saw on tape. And I think that's what I walked away with. And what helped even boost it a little bit more is I had a conversation with Matt Harmon from Reception Perception, Yahoo Sports, all that. And we did a YouTube video for Dynasty Nerds. So if you want to check that out, that is on YouTube. But one of the guys we talked about was Elijah Moore. And he said this, and at first it seems ridiculous. Like you're like, why are you saying this, Matt? Like get out of here. But the more I looked at it, I was like, as a prospect, like I can kind of see where it came from. He said his ceiling comp, this is a ceiling, but his ceiling comp is Antonio Brown. And it's hot. It's very hot. But looking at it, I kind of see where he's coming from. They're similar size. They're both very speedy players. They go over the middle, make contested catches. Even though they have the speed, they win more with their route running and technique more than they do anything else. So when it came down to all of that, there just wasn't enough for me to be able to turn him away. So, that's why he ended up so high for me. I still love Denzel Mims. It's not a knock on Mims at all. But I think if this offense does what it could and should do, I think both of those guys can be fantasy relevant players for the foreseeable future.
That was actually going to be my next question is if you sat there, right, and you had Denzel Mims and you Elijah Moore on the startup draft, who are you taking first? Are you going Denzel Mims, who has a better physical profile, maybe not as much of a, great route running profile, but, which one are you going with at this point?
Yeah, it's really close. I'm still going with Denzel Mims. I was also a very big Mims fan, but it's very, very close for me. So, yeah, I'm going to stick with Mims.
Okay. No, I like that because a lot of people are actually saying at this point Elijah Moore, and I feel like that's almost like a rookie hype train type thing. I still like Mims slightly more just because he has a better physical profile, can separate a little better in my opinion, and we a little bit physical. We saw a lot on tape last year. Now, it was very inconsistent, and a lot of that had to do with his quarterback play and him being hurt early. Remember when people were comping Jamison Crowder to AV? Shane is in the chat.
What's up, Shane? Shane's the worst.
Oh, he is the worst, but he's the best at the same time.
He's the best. He's the best.
Is that still on Tuesdays?
Is that still his Twitter handle? Is it still he's the worst?
Shane is the worst.
Okay,
Yep,
that's
of
what
course.
I thought. All right. No, Shane's a great dude. But yeah, I still really, really do like Denzel Mims. Lots of those contested catches. He's got the speed, he's got the profile, he's got all of that as well. It was just really, really inconsistent quarterback play. So I think that offensive line's better. They'll have a little bit more time, and I think that Zach Wilson is going to be a little bit better than what we saw out of Sam Darnold.
Yeah, it's interesting because the rebuild in the offensive line, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, but I think that Zach Wilson might have the ability to succeed, but it scares me a little bit. Side note, before I actually dive into why it scares me, is you were actually the second guest I ever had on my podcast from like Twitter encounter.
Oh, nice.
Shane was the first.
Oh, was he?
Yeah. So
look at that. A little reunion over here.
Of course. No, but sitting there and looking at it, you have a quarterback who's not polished, right? Who probably needs a year of development.
Yep.
Going to probably the hardest division or up there in the top, two when it comes to, rookie quarterbacks, against the defense. You have a Miami defense that terrorized offenses last season.
Mm-hmm.
You have Bill Belichick, who is the master up against rookie quarterbacks for the most part. And then you have a Bills defense who, although they had a bad pass rush last year, they still were in the top 10 in pass rush or hurries from 2020. So it's not the easiest schedule you're going to be seeing for at least 6 games a year, not to mention, all the other teams they have to face this year. So I'm very interested to see how, Zach can actually handle the pressure and how he does moving forward. And if this offensive line, which is being revamped, which, like I mentioned, we're going to talk about here in a second, can actually deal with that pressure. So let's talk about a wide receiver that the Texans actually moved up for.
Yeah.
I believe they traded 2 picks, right? I think it was like 2 fourth-round picks to move up into the 3rd round and select Nico Collins. Big physical guy. He's 6'3", 6'4".
Yep.
So I was sitting there and I was looking at your nerd score, right? And I'll give you a second to actually talk about your nerd score in a second. But you guys actually had him right there with Terrace Marshall, Amon-Ra St. Brown. I felt like he kind of slipped on, your rankings a little bit in terms of where you had him graded versus where he was. Now, is that because of the Texans? Is that because of Deshaun Watson? And honestly, I strongly believe that these are 2 completely different narratives. Like the Texans are a whole different narrative to whether Deshaun Watson actually plays with the Texans this year.
Right.
So, does this have anything to do with your landing spot, or did you just find like there was a gap between Nico Collins and Terrace Marshall, even after your nerd score graded pretty closely?
So there's a combination of those things there in play. Part of it is there was a little bit, not necessarily as much of a gap as just when I added in all of the veteran receivers, there was enough guys that were in between those 2 players that it kind of made a little bit of a gap, because Marshall is, as much as I'm not the biggest Marshall guy, there are definitely people that like Marshall more than I do. I do think he's fairly safe, goes to a very good offense. We know he'll at least be a decent player. Nico is your classic high ceiling, low floor guy. His numbers were not good at all at Michigan. But part of it was there was really bad quarterback play. When you watched him, I actually got to see him live at the Senior Bowl, walked away very impressed with him as an athlete overall. I think he is going to be a good receiver. So part of that gap there was, just other players that are veterans kind of coming in between them. The ceiling and floor. And then the last but not least was, the Texans did play a little bit of a role. Could there just be so many targets for him that it doesn't matter? Sure. But we have no idea what to expect out of this team this year. I mean, there's 100 different things that could be true about this team. It could be Deshaun Watson's team, although that's looking very unlikely for multiple reasons. It could be Tyrod Taylor's team. It could be Davis Mills' team. And we don't know what this team's going to do in the future. Their future is extremely murky. Really, the only player of note that is under contract for any significant amount of time is Laramie Tunsil. That's it.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Like that's literally the only guy.
They have like 35 free agents or something insane like that.
It's wild. So there's just so much up in the air, and these young raw receivers, which Nico is fairly raw. He just didn't get the time, the catches, the production in college that you would want to typically see, that it's just such a high risk, high reward pick. So in rookie drafts, if it's a super flex, I've been taking him right around that, somewhere between like 211 and like 302, like right in there. It kind of seems like the sweet spot for Nico. But you absolutely have to understand that could end up being a gold mine, or you could have absolutely lit that pick on fire and he could be out of the league in 2 years. Like, I have no clue.
So he's just not as polished as a receiver that you like to see that could overcome some of these challenges, that some of these other receivers could see. But sitting there and looking at the turn for the late second, early third for a super flex league, I mean, you're sitting there looking at what, Amari Rodgers possibly.
Yep. I've seen Amari Rodgers around there. The quarterbacks, the next wave of quarterbacks seem to go right around there. Kellen Mond and Davis Mills. Trying to think who else has been going around that range. Kadarius Toney, when he falls a little bit, seems to go close to there.
We actually have a question in the chat from Shane. Are you going Nico or Tony? And this might be a shot at me. I don't know. We'll see.
It is close. It's close for me. I would still go Tony over Nico. And it's hard because I do think Nico has a higher ceiling than Tony has. But when you have a player that has the first round draft capital, and I do think that's an ascending offense. They spent a lot of resources on their offensive line last year. It's a very young offensive line, so I think it needs some time to develop. But Tony also does things that no one else on that offense does. Darius Slayton's a great deep threat, but he's not your prototypical X receiver. Sterling Shepard's a great possession guy. Tony could really be that underneath yards after the catch kind of guy that could really open things up for this offense. So I think Tony is a little bit safer, but I think Nico has the higher ceiling. So it's kind of whatever you want to go for there. But I think Tony's ceiling's still high enough, even though it's not as high as Nico's, that I feel more comfortable taking him.
I did draft Tony today in the second round, which was actually shocking to me personally because I love Tony. I just was not a fan of landing spot. I actually like the Giants pick of Tony. I thought, like you said, it could open up the landing spot for fantasy purposes. It drove a dagger through my heart because I was a big Tony fan. It was tough. It was really tough. But I'm sitting there and I'm looking at the opportunities and everything like that. And I'm like, man, this could be great. But then you have Jason Garrett, who obviously never used a slot receiver, killed Cole Beasley, never used a slot receiver. And I'm like dying inside. So I got to see how it pans out. But I feel like his talent could usurp his I guess the role in which Jason Garrett might use him. And hopefully, to your point of your tweet, which if you want to bring that up right now, where situations change just constantly, I'm hoping that it changes for Kadarius Toney. I really am. I'm desperately hoping that his situation changes. Do you want to talk about your tweet that you put up the other day?
Yeah. So basically, I went through and I looked at all of these different landing spots for all the guys from the 2018 draft. So we were looking at guys like N'Keal Harry. We loved N'Keal Harry because he was getting Tom Brady, right? He was going to that Brady offense is going to be the wide receiver one. Well, a year later, Brady's gone. So, and he's now playing with Cam Newton. We hated AJ Brown because he was in Tennessee and they have a recycled quarterback and, but now AJ Brown's one of the best receivers in football and he's getting plenty of targets now. Even he'll probably even get more than he got last year because people were worried about Corey Davis being the wide receiver one and he's gone. So, there's so many of those situations positively and negatively that just change so much that I don't factor it nearly as highly as other people do. That's why when you go and you look at my personal tape grades, which are slightly different than the nerd score, because obviously that's a culmination of a few different people putting those together. But when you look at my personal tape scores and my rankings, you'll see that they're very close. There might be like a spot or two different on a few guys, but they didn't change all that much because it's really the only ones that changed were more because of somebody got better or worse draft capital than I expected. I didn't really care where exactly they went.
I like that. So tell me why the hell you have Kenny Gainwell so low? Because no, he's sitting there. He ends up with the Eagles, right? And the Eagles have Miles Sanders, and last year Miles Sanders was used far from the best way possible. He was actually extremely efficient. He had a 5.3 yards per carry, which I know it should not be a stat, but it is a stat, and it shows that he was efficient regardless of what happened. He was top 20 in juke rate, top 20 in evaded tackles. He was creating yards for himself. It wasn't always great. It wasn't always the best, but you also had great defenses he had to go against constantly throughout the year, and he still created yards on a regular basis. So sitting there and looking at it, we have Sirianni, who's coming in.
Yep.
And he operated in Indy, right? And we know what Indy did because we all love Jonathan Taylor, and Jonathan Taylor crushed our hearts in the first half of the season, right?
Right.
I mean, were you a Jonathan Taylor fan? You can be honest.
I was. I had Jonathan Taylor over CEH, and I remember right around like week 9 or so, Rich just like bashing the snot out of me because he was like, "You were trying to tell people to take Jonathan Taylor over CEH. How? Like, I just don't get it." Blah blah blah. And then
good for you.
And then second half of the year, I got to get a little bit of my revenge, and I was like, "Yeah, suck it." So
good for you, because I was right there with you. I had literally Jonathan Taylor's like a half a point above DeAndre Swift. But yeah, Jonathan Taylor like melted faces. However, it started a little bit concerning because they were going with the hot hand, right?
They were. Yep.
They were going with whoever was doing the best in these games. And luckily, Jonathan Taylor did the best, ending the season. But like we're sitting there, we're looking at Kenny Gainwell, who, by the way, Shane brings up was drafted in the 5th round.
That was the biggest reason he fell for me. Was I thought his draft capital was going to be 3rd round.
I had the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I had the same thing, and he ends up with the Eagles now, who already have a starting running back potentially for 2 years. And we're sitting there looking at the possibility of him maybe not seeing as many touches, but if he gets hot, right, or if he starts being able to catch passes out of the backfield and they start to use him as the 3rd down receiver because he's great at it. Like, is there any chance we're actually going to see a steal with Kenny Gainwell? Or is it going to be the Miles Sanders show throughout the entire year and for a couple years to come?
It's definitely a possibility. I'm not going to rule it out. I do think he's a more talented player than his draft capital showed. He was one of the guys that I really truly thought he was going to be a 3rd round pick. And part of that was because he only played as a redshirt sophomore, took the year off with, the COVID stuff and all of that, and then declared for the draft. So if you have the balls to say, like, I'm only going to put my freshman tape out there and then I'm going to go to the NFL, my thought process was the information that he's getting is that he's going to have good draft capital. Otherwise, why would you forego having a redshirt sophomore, a redshirt junior, a redshirt senior season? Like, why would you forego all that if you're not going to get good draft capital? And I thought his tape matched up pretty well, but clearly the NFL did not agree, and he got some bad advice somewhere.
Well, the craziest part about this was the reason that he sat out was because he had 4 family members die of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it wasn't like, oh, I'm just going to opt out because I want to get my stuff in shape and everything. Not only that, right? Like, not only did he opt out because of serious, family health concerns, but it was like, oh, he's still going to remain in the same shape. He won't be able to stay in the locker rooms, work out with the training staff. Dude, he put on what, 10, 15 pounds from, the season prior to. So he got his weight up. He still tested pretty well overall.
Yeah,
I'd say above average, if not great. Maybe not, through the roof. Still
but it was real solid.
And then sitting there and looking at it, like, he ends up with like the worst possible situation because like he's so similar to Miles Sanders to an extent.
Yeah.
Either we're looking at a situation where he sees some targets because, listen, the Eagles, they did not target the running back last year very often. They were in the bottom 10. We saw them sit there and target the running back 17.4% of the time when Carson Wentz was at quarterback. And they're like, oh, Hurts won't target the running back. But when Hurts was starting at quarterback, he still targeted the running back 17.1% of the time. So he only saw a 0.3% drop in targets. So he still used the running back, position. Maybe that's because he can't throw it on the field. Maybe, we don't know. But sitting there and looking at it, I mean, what if they use Kenny Gainwell in the slot? Like, what if they design, these plays for him because he is that special? And that's kind of where I feel like we could actually have a breakout candidate and somebody that could be a steal at the front end of drafts where, you might be trying to take somebody safe, but they might turn out to be a roster clog as well versus Kenny Gainwell could be that breakout player that nobody saw coming.
I think the way that happens because we always, as fantasy managers, I think we always want to see some of these talented running backs in the slot more. We don't typically see it. There's a few guys that have done it on a semi-regular basis, but we still don't see it a lot. The way that I see that happens is if they do, in fact, end up cutting Zach Ertz, which means they're going to probably go less 12 personnel than they went this past season. That's the more likely scenario to where we could see some of that out of Kenny G. Otherwise, I just don't know that they're even going to run 12 personnel enough to warrant it. 11 personnel enough to warrant it. So I'm not quite sure. I hope they do. I like the kid. I think he's more talented than he's gotten credit for. but it's really tough when you're on a team with a talented young running back. It would be tough, but I'm rooting for that to happen.
I mean, yeah, I would take, like Shane brought up, I'd take him in the slot over Greg Ward.
Yeah.
I would take him over, in the slot over Travis Fulgham. The kid has like an immense amount of talent. He can actually, break plays off, and his speed, I know it's not breakaway speed, but it's very, very deceptive when it comes to
it's very
beating
good.
people to the corner and then turning the ball upfield. So I love that take by Shane. Now, obviously, the offensive line, right? It's been hurting last year. It was hurting last year big time for Philly. So we're kind of going to transition into offensive lines and see if we can talk about some of these offensive lines, see who can actually benefit. But, like we're sitting there, we're looking at what Lane Johnson, Andre Dillard. Are the Eagles going to be back to normal? Or is it just going to revert back to the same offensive line we saw last year?
I think they will be better than they were off last year. They had so many injuries so early on in the season. I mean, even before camp started, their offensive line was banged up, and as the season went on, it only got worse. So I do think it'll be much better, and because of that, I think it was funny because last year I thought they were always overdrafting Miles Sanders, and now it's kind of gone to the opposite effect where now I think Miles Sanders has become a really good value. So it's funny how that changes. He went from like a top 6 back for people in Dynasty to now he's not even close to the top 12 for a lot of people. So it's funny how some of those things flip and change. And that's why you just kind of always got to monitor the value of these players. It wasn't ever, I did or didn't like Miles Sanders. It was just overpriced versus underpriced. So, but I think this is going to be a much improved offensive line just on health alone.
I felt like that's a play on words, but I agree with you. Overpriced versus underpriced. All right, so
that happens.
I liked it. I think that should be a thing. I think that should actually be a segment that you guys follow through with on Dynasty Nerds.
We actually
overpriced or underpriced.
We actually thought about doing like Dynasty Price Check with Garret Price. Like we thought about doing something like that for a little bit, but we were like, yeah, that's probably a little too cheesy.
Oh God, Tyler Gunther had me do every other Sunday, right, for Dynasty Happy Hour. And I brought on Taylor with me, right? And Taylor and I did this segment every other Saturday. It was called Chasing Points, which I was like, if we could pick anything else in the entire world outside of Chasing Points, I would love it. Of course not. He had everything designed. Everything was ready to rock and roll. And he picked Chasing Points.
Chasing
with
Points.
Chase.
There it is.
Oh, God.
You got to love the puns, man. You got to love the puns.
No, I love Tyler for doing it too. So it was fun. But typically, like, when sitting there and looking at, offensive lines, they invest and then they reinvest and then they reinvest and they reinvest because not everybody fits in the same system that you have, in your head, like not the same, ideology between blocking schemes and athletic fits. And it becomes kind of almost like contradicting to sometimes because you get a guy who's super powerful. He doesn't have the agility to keep up, whatever the case is. Bill Callahan does a great job of being able to fit his pieces in. He's probably the best offensive line coach in NFL history, in my opinion, that just stayed as an offensive line coach. Everywhere he goes, their offensive line jumps up at least 10 spots without making any changes.
Yep.
However, most teams have to draft over and over and over again and sign free agents over and over and over again. And it's almost like upgrading your bench spot on your fantasy teams, right? Where like you have these bench spots and eventually you're going to have to trade them off. But you're going to upgrade, when you trade them off, right? Every time. Or at least you're going to hope you're going to upgrade.
That's the plan anyway.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's the plan. It's the plan. But sitting there and looking at it, right? The offensive line is more dependent on their teammates than any other position on the field. I know that you have linebackers who depend on the defensive tackles to be able to create holes and everything like that. But for me, it has to be one cohesive unit. If everybody doesn't move at the same pace, I think offensive line gets affected more than anybody else. And it affects the quarterback. It affects the running back. I mean, we could sit there and talk about it for hours, which we have done before.
Yeah.
But, speaking of what we talked about before with the Browns, we sat there last year, was around May or actually it was probably June or July at this point. We talked about the Browns being the next guy up.
Yep.
We talked about J.C. Treader. They acquired Wyatt Teller. They signed Conklin. They already had Joel Patino. So they went out and drafted Jedrick Wills. And we're like, oh, this is going to be a fire spot. This is going to be fire. Is there any better running back to run this system, to run this scheme, to be behind this offensive line than Nick Chubb? And I'm pretty sure it was you. Didn't you put out a tweet about Nick Chubb
Yeah.
recently? What was that tweet?
Oh, Jared was the one that just put one out about Nick Chubb.
Oh, was it
recently.
Jared? Okay.
Yeah, but basically he said that he missed 4 games. There was something else. He missed 4 games.
It was
something
less
else.
than 60% of the snap share. I remember seeing that.
Yeah, and yet he
Or
was still an
62%.
RB1.
Yeah, because it was literally the perfect system, right? And it was the
Yep.
perfect offensive line. It was the perfect coaching scheme, and he absolutely exploded. He exploded on the scene. It was something that everybody was sitting there kind of hesitant about. And Nick Chubb, dude, he went mid-second round in a lot of cases last year, but he should have been a top 10 pick.
Oh, I mean, just on pure running back alone, I truly do believe he is the best runner of the football in the league. Now, you can make arguments for better pass blockers and pass protection or better pass catchers out of the backfield, but as a pure runner of the football, there's nobody I'm taking above Nick Chubb.
No, and dude, they're sitting there and they're sitting real pretty, walking in with, oh my God, Judge Wills. Like it was the perfect storm of everything that could have happened. And so I want to dive back into it with you. We're a little bit early compared to last year, just a little bit, just a couple months. And we're sitting there and we're looking at a few teams who made, reinvestment after reinvestment after reinvestment onto the offensive line. And we're sitting there and we're looking at the Lions, who have drafted 9 offensive linemen over the past 6 years. It was the first time in their franchise history from 2016 to 2019 where they invested 2 top 4-round picks into the offensive line. And that was the first time, first or maybe second time in the Lions history they did that. They still kept investing. They still kept on signing free agents. They still kept on trying to build this up. And guess what? Like from 2016 to 2010, they were nothing. Their offensive line was terrible. Like they were getting Matthew Stafford crushed on a regular basis. And we're like, just give them an offensive line. This new regime comes in and the new regime kills it, right? The new regime does a phenomenal job at rebuilding this offensive line. But unfortunately, with Matt Patricia and all them, they didn't do a good job coaching. They didn't develop any other position outside of the offensive line. So new regime comes in. And they're set up with this offensive line that was 9th in, I believe, pass blocking, 13th in run blocking. And they go out and they get Penei Sewell.
Yep.
Is this the next level for the Detroit Lions offensive line? Are they set up for success for the next, 3, 4, 5 years minimum? Are they about to melt faces with DeAndre Swift? Are they going to end up giving Jared Goff actual time to pass because we know that Goff does not do well under pressure?
Yeah.
What's going to happen here? What's your prediction for this offensive line and how it's going to support either the run or pass game?
Yeah, I think they've done an excellent job. I absolutely loved their draft. And looking at some of these teams and some of these new staffs that have come in, I've really appreciated how big of an emphasis they've put in the trenches on both the offensive and defensive line and just building those trenches. Because if you can win the war in the trenches, the rest is so much easier. But if you're already losing up front, it truly, you have to have special players in order to be able to overcome that. That's why, Barry Sanders was one of the few Detroit Lions to actually be successful back there because he was that special. Those are the type of talents you have to be able to overcome poor offensive line and poor defensive line play. I really like what they've done. I think DeAndre Swift is a very talented running back. When I did my nerd score last year, he had the second highest grade for me, and it was very, very close at the running back position. And so I'm on board with him as a player, as a playmaker. My only concern really is, do they have enough receiving weapons for, and part of it is, a lot of defensive fronts are based on offensive formation. So, people will talk about how many guys are in the box and whatnot. 9 times out of 10, that's more based on what the formation is, whether they're running, 12 personnel or 11 personnel or different things like that. So that's the biggest thing with that. But you still have safeties that'll walk up more, that'll blitz more, that'll do certain things if there's not those passing weapon threats. So I think that's the biggest thing that's going to be a hindrance, is there's just not enough of a fear of the passing game at this point. That's going to be the only thing that holds him back. But if Amon-Ra comes in and balls out And, TJ Hawkinson does what he can do at the tight end position. And anybody, literally I don't care if it's Perriman. I don't care if it's the Gazelle. I don't care if it's Quintez Cephas. I don't care who it is. But if just one of them steps up along with those two other guys, then that might be enough to really open things up. And DeAndre Swift, I'm a fan of his. I wouldn't say I'm the biggest fan in the world, but I am a fan of his. But there is absolutely a path to him being a top 3 running back this season for fantasy football purposes if all of those things come together.
So Ben Roethlisberger had 7.1 air yards per attempt in 2020.
Okay.
Does Jared Goff go over or under 7.1 air yards per attempt in 2021?
I'm assuming his arm isn't quite as spaghetti as Ben Roethlisberger's is at this point. So we'll give him 0.2 or 3 more yards. So I'll take the slight over.
Oh, man. Amon-Ra St. Brown is the next Cooper Kupp. His average depth target is going to be 2 yards. He's going to get these dump offs shorter than Juju Smith-Schuster, which, by the way, blew my mind when I saw his average depth target. Oh, my. That's insane.
Yeah.
That is insane what Juju did last year. And the fact that he hit, what was it, 79 receptions or 96 receptions, 97 receptions?
I don't
know
off the top of my head.
It's crazy and didn't break the number that he broke. It was absolutely nuts. But I'm very interested to see, what becomes this offense because he's going to be doing a bunch of dump offs, a bunch of short routes to Amon-Ra St. Brown. And of course, he's going to be hitting TJ Hawkinson in the flat a ton as well. Now, the next player I want to talk about is Austin Eckler because the Chargers, they're brutal. They're stoked. Wait.
Their line was brutal last year.
It was bad. It's been bad.
But they added Slater.
2010 or something.
Yeah, it was terrible last year, but they added Slater.
Not only Slater.
And they added, who else did they add?
They added Lindsley from the Packers, who was
that's right, Corey Lindsley.
Center. They also added Filer, I think that's how you say it, from Pittsburgh, who they'll end up sliding into guard.
Okay, I missed that one.
They'll end up sliding into guard. Very good acquisition for the price they got him at. They've already been set up. They have Beluga right on the right tackle position. They have who is it on the right guard position? Either way, they're set. This is the best offensive line the Chargers have maybe ever had in Chargers history.
Yeah,
this is going to be nuts. It's been so bad. So I went through it and I'm like, wow, this is bottom 5. This is bottom 5. This is bottom 5. I swear, out of the past, and I got bored because I couldn't find a good year outside of 2012 or 14 or something. As to where they weren't bottom 10 in rankings for the offensive line. It's been that bad for the Chargers. And it's blown my mind. I've never seen anything like it. They just didn't care. They're like, Philip Rivers, just chuck it. As soon as you do a 3-step drop, just chuck it. And that's what he did. That's what he did for many, many years. And he was very good at it. And they were like, oh, we don't need to build this up. He's just going to chuck it or dump it off to the running back. Well, guess what? That's not how the NFL works anymore. You have to protect your quarterback regardless. Yep. You got to give him time to throw downfield or else you're just going to be, pretty much middling the game away. Might as well just do running plays over and over again. So they went out and they made all these acquisitions. This is a team, right, that could end up stepping up into the top 10 of offensive line rankings. Now, obviously, Justin Herbert benefits, but Justin Herbert can escape pressure. So I don't know if he's really going to benefit or maybe even lose some value because of the fact he's not going to scramble as much. Still, he didn't scramble a whole ton. So I'm not sitting there saying, oh, he's a mobile quarterback that's not going to be mobile. Don't get me wrong. But Austin Eckler, who's sitting there in a prime position, he's already breaking tackles, he's already evading tackles, he's one of the most elusive running backs in the NFL. Now he gets to sit there and save all of his juice for the linebackers and the safeties at the second level. Now, these guys are a little bit quicker. They're not as slow as defensive tackles. But if we're sitting there, we're looking at Austin Eckler. Is he getting undervalued right now? Because he's going in a lot of drafts in the late third, early fourth. And last year, he was going on the 2 to 3 turn. And he got hurt and didn't perform at the top end level we expected. So what is your take on Austin Eckler? Maybe even Joshua Kelly.
So with this offensive line, and I'm glad you told me about the guard because I totally missed that. One of the things that can be a little tricky is you do have to keep an eye out when over half of the offensive line is new. That is always something that concerns me a little bit because of the cohesion, how long it takes for things to get moving. but also specifically with the interior part of the offensive line, those are the ones that have to communicate the most. The tackles are kind of on their own little island. There are some offenses where they'll pull the entire left side or pull the entire right side, but for the most
wide
part,
zone blocking schemes.
Exactly. So, they don't pull as much in the wide zone. It'll be more of the
right.
Yeah, it'll be more of the gap schemes where you'll see a lot of the pulling and things like that. But so that worries me a little bit. I think long term, I think they're going to be in great shape. So 2022, I think it's wheels up. This year, I would expect the first half of the year to not be that much better, similar to what we saw of the Giants last year, where the line got better as the year went on. But when the interior part of that offensive line is all new, it takes a little bit for all that to flow. All of that being said, I do think it's going to be beneficial for Justin Herbert long term. For Austin Eckler, though, I'm not sure how much of a difference it's going to make, because most of his fantasy football production came out of catching the football anyway. He was always on the lower end as far as actual handoffs, actual rushes. He was always on the lower end. We're looking at somewhere between 100 to 150, I would guess, would be his top. I'd have to look at the exact numbers, but those are, and then he's going to get another, hopefully 70, 80 receptions out of the backfield. That's where most of his are going to come. So as long as he's still getting the passes from Justin Herbert, I think we're fine. That's what would more concern me, is just so little of his value actually comes from running the football.
So is Joshua Kelly going to benefit, or is this going to be a Larry Roundtree situation?
I think he would be the main beneficiary. I think Justin Jackson's still there too.
Justin Jackson's a poor man's Austin Eckler. But wait, which one's going to benefit, Joshua Kelly or Larry Roundtree?
Kelly over Roundtree.
Okay, cool. I was getting a little worried there.
No. I like Larry Roundtree for what he is, and the fact that he was able to start for so many years in the SEC and just get the tar beat out of him at Missouri. Like, I respect it. But he's your classic, like, Larry Roundtree does everything meh. Like, he doesn't actually do anything well except for, like, being thick. Like, that's what he does well, is thick.
Thick?
Yeah. Outside of that, like, it's like, oh, that wasn't bad, but it also wasn't that good. So, like,
thick with 3 C's.
Yeah, exactly. So he'll just be he'll be a third down back forever, and that's about it. Or a third in the depth chart, not a third down back. Third in the depth chart.
Oh man, sitting there looking at it. So you talked about cohesiveness, and the Jets were a team that did not have that last year, and it was blatantly obvious. Whether that was Adam Case or whatever the case was. I did not mean for that to rhyme, but sitting there and looking at it, like we're sitting there and we're looking at the Jets, who, man, they got Becton last year. They signed Fant. They brought in McGovern, Alex Lewis, Greg Van Roten, or Roten, however you say his name. We're sitting there and we're looking at, like, them taking the next step, but it just was not cohesive. And where Le'Veon Bell runs the best is up the middle. And they just did not have those gaps. They weren't able to work together to shift them through the line. And Pittsburgh did that very well, by the way. They were one of the best offensive lines in terms of shifting people around where they wanted to shift them. It was almost like sitting there and trying to build Tetris, right? But the opposite version of it, where you're trying to create holes.
Yeah.
Dude, the Jets did not have that last year, and they thought they could have built that just overnight. It did not happen. Le'Veon Bell did not excel there, because guess what? That's not what Le'Veon Bell does.
Right.
This year, they're sitting there and they're getting, I'm not going to say a similar running back to Le'Veon Bell, because Michael Carter is not similar, but it is a very shifty running back. Mm-hmm. He's not going to have breakaway speed. And the wide zone run scheme, which is probably going to be brought in by Michael LaFleur and this coaching staff, it's not really what Michael Carter Williams excels in, but they do use different tactics with different running backs.
Right.
This is what people are kind of, I guess, failing to acknowledge, is the fact that you actually have an offensive system that is very complex. Mm-hmm. Now, the Jets have had, obviously, it's new coaching staff come in, but they have at least had a year together, and then they go in and they add in Elijah Vera Tucker, who I love.
It was a great
pick. My God. This was the best pick the Jets have made in 20 years, in my opinion. This was an amazing pick. But once again, we talk about the cohesiveness. So is Elijah Vera Tucker, beneficial to this pick? How do you think this offensive line is going to do together? And do they have the talent to make either LaMichael Pirine, if that's your choice, or Michael Carter Williams, or Frank Gore decides to come back? Maybe Adrian Peterson signs.
Kevin Coleman's actually still. He ended up getting signed in the offseason.
Yes, that's my sleeper pick. Let's go. Let's go. This is the perfect pick. Wait, I was actually going to leave that one as an open-ended question, but go ahead. Tell me what you think.
No, I
got a little excited.
I think that's a player that's probably going to benefit the most out of all of this. They're going to want to install their new system, their new offense. Fortunately, Vera Tucker, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because I haven't done a ton of study into their offensive line other than their draft selection. I think he's the only new starter. I think the rest are going to be the same. So the cohesion shouldn't be too bad, actually. You just have to get one guy as opposed to the Chargers where we're trying to get three guys, two of them on the interior meshing all at the same time. They really only have one new one, right?
Yeah, and they don't even know that Elijah Vera Tucker's going to be the starter to start the year. They might work him in.
That would be wild, 14th overall pick to not start him. But, I mean, that's a good luxury to have if you're able to do that. I think that he would be the bigger beneficiary because I think Michael Carter, similar to Austin Eckler, that's going to be more of his role. He's going to do a lot of third down stuff. I don't see him getting over 100 actual rushing attempts on the season. If he did, I would be very surprised. We saw it in San Francisco. I think they're going to use different guys in different situations to best fit that game plan against that specific team. And that's how they're going to roll it out. So I think Coleman and Carter will be the 1-2 punch, and it'll depend on the week which one ends up better. But the two of them will be frustrating to figure out which one to start. They'd be much more exciting in best ball because trying to pick out which one's going to have the good week is going to be tough.
You're not going to be able to because it's going to be the hot hand. And Elijah Mitchell added to that. It's a nightmare. It's a complete nightmare. So sitting there and looking at it, I'm in the middle of a draft, and I've been on the clock for 57 seconds, and they're already messaging me. But I'll tell you what, people are amazing. No, sitting there and looking at the Bengals, right? And the Bengals. Where's Tyler? Taylor? Where's Taylor? Can we get Taylor in here? We need Taylor in here right now to talk about the Bengals. Can you message him on Twitter and be like, hey, we need you in here?
Yeah, I can message him.
Message them, be like, hey, we need you in here. Because we're sitting there and the Bengals, what a franchise. What a great job they have done over there. I'm being somewhat facetious. They opted to skip on Sewell, right? They stuck. Perfect. They stuck with their tackles, and they went with the offensive guard. Yeah, I'm saying offensive guard in Carmen, not the offensive tackle, the offensive guard in Carmen in the second round. They've been sitting there. They've been trying really, really hard to find these offensive linemen. They've been trying so hard. They've drafted 8 offensive linemen in the past 4 drafts. I mean, they paid their price. Billy Price, which I did not mean to actually, but they've drafted offensive lineman after offensive lineman after offensive lineman. They just have not hit. So they just gave up this year. They said, hey, we can't tell that Sewell is a good offensive lineman. So we're just going to skip on Sewell and just trust our instincts as a wide receiver, drafting team and just hope that hits. So how are you feeling about the pick first off? And then we'll go into the rest of it.
It's tough for me because I am a big proponent of you got to make sure that you're building up front. So my pick would have been Sewell at that spot. That being said, if they had a higher grade on Chase and you truly think that he is that elite of a wide receiver, I get it. Like you take your guy, you take, who's the highest player on your board and you roll with the rest. So I understand it. Would it have been my selection? No. But if that's really truly what they thought, then fine. It is another offensive line that's pretty young. The kid out of Alabama that was hurt 2 years ago. He was their first round pick. Why am I blinking on his name?
Jonah Williams?
Yes, Jonah Williams. I kept wanting to say Jonathan Williams. I knew that wasn't right. Jonah Williams. So, he'll be back. He'll have another year under his belt too. So I think this line is headed in a good direction. I think it's going to be better than what we've seen in the past, but it's still not going to be a good offensive line. It's still going to probably be, a bottom 15 offensive line. So my question is, can they create an offense where they get the ball out quickly? Can they do, a lot of these quick slants, different things like that? That I think is where they're going to probably be the most successful this year, because I don't have any confidence that there's enough there up front to give Joe Burrow the time that he really needs.
No, and honestly, that's the reality of it. But at the same time, they went and acquired Sulafilio. Is that how you say it? Sulafilo? Sulafilio? Either way.
I'm good at
They
butchering
went,
names, so I'm not the best one to ask.
Riley Reef was another one they went out and
Reef.
got.
I thought
So,
Reef was actually a very good pickup. I know people in Minnesota were like, he's trash. But he's been very solid for a long time, much better than what they've had in Cincinnati.
yeah, and if Jonah Williams doesn't get hurt again, then you're set up in a good spot. But Taylor brought up a good point last night on our Tuesday night show, where you have Shane, myself and Jacob on there. And he brought up a good point where their offensive line coach, which we talked about earlier, how Bill Cowan is such a great piece or great offensive line coach. Offensive line coaches do matter because they do make more.
Very much so.
So this offense has not been the same since leaving them. But either way, Reef's great ad. Slofilio's a great ad. Now they add the guard in with Carmen. Obviously he has short hands. He's not going to tackle regardless of his, college position says. The guy literally has arms that might be T-Rex arms. So he's great at pushing it back, but is this the year? Is this the year for Joe Mixon? That's my question for you.
It's really more of a question is, can he stay healthy? Because last year, especially those last two games right before the big injury for him, he was playing really well. And the thing that was always the biggest issue with him was he just wasn't getting the touches in the passing game. Well, Gio Bernard's gone now, and we heard their offensive coordinator come out and say that they just want to leave Joe Mixon on the field. Now, for a guy that's been hurt a lot, that scares you in that sense. But as far as total touches, I think he's going to have enough volume to be able to be a legitimate RB1. He was, he was 3 years ago now. I think he was RB11. 2 years ago, he was RB13. Last year, he was on pace to be, I want to say, RB8 before the injury. So he's been right around that RB1 range for a while. I think this could be the year where he finally solidifies it and has a solid RB1 season, like an RB7 season or something like that. I think that is in the realm of possibilities.
But would you bet on it?
What are my odds?
Oh, the tough questions.
What are my odds?
We're not asking odds. I'm saying, would you draft him as an RB7 opportunity guy?
In redraft, I would probably draft him somewhere between RB9 and 11, somewhere in there, without looking at my board, because I do tend to focus more on Dynasty, so those are a little more fresh in my mind. But off the top of my head, probably somewhere between 9 and 11 at running back. So I would draft him as an RB1, maybe not quite as high as 7 though.
No, that makes sense. He makes me nervous, man, and he always has. Because he could produce with a bad offensive line, he can produce without run block, he can produce without the passing. But is he going to stay healthy like you brought up? And that's a very, very big factor.
It is, absolutely.
So that's going to close out our conversation tonight, Garrett. We're going to end on Joe Mixon. Very exciting. Is there any other rookie that you would like to bring up and let the whole entire world know about? Obviously, Jacob was too afraid to show up. So I kind of want you to end on a note that, lets Jacob know who you drafted at 212 in your mock.
At 212, who would I draft?
No, at 212, who did you draft?
Oh, 212. In what mock?
It's the name that you probably butchered. It is Smith Marset.
Oh, Amir Smith Marset.
Oh, you didn't butcher that one.
I nailed that one because he's my boy. I've done like 4 different mocks over different platforms over the past few days, so I have no clue which one. No, I actually do really like Amir Smith Marset. He was a receiver out of Iowa, and Iowa's offense was gross. I mean, it was a tough one to watch, and the passing attack is very stuck in the past. And here we have this Cadillac that is just trying to get out, but it can't because the offense sucks. He's very great speed. He was also a kick returner. You see that a little bit on his tape after catching the football. Just can make plays happen in the open field. He's got pretty good size, 6'1.5". And I believe he came in around 190 pounds. So pretty solid size as well. And he was taken in the 5th round and went to Minnesota. That's a team that we've seen. They don't care that much about draft capital for wide receivers. The best guys are going to play. Stephon Diggs was their top wide receiver for a long time. He was drafted in the 5th round as well. Adam Thielen wasn't even drafted. So right now, this team, and Adam Thielen's 31, so I don't know how much longer he's going to be able to produce like he has in the past. So it's really the Justin Jefferson show. That's really the only solid wide receiver that we have for the foreseeable future. After that, it's guys like Chad Beebe, Olabisi Johnson. I can't even think of who they have other than that. So if I'm going to take somebody that has some high upside, I think he has very, very high upside compared to some other players. Now, I took him at 212 in that mock because we literally had not talked about him at Nerds at all yet, and I wanted to make sure his name got out there before people's rookie drafts. And I think I even said it on the podcast. I've taken him at the end of 3rd, beginning of the 4th in a lot of places, so you don't have to take him as early as 212. We didn't even cover him in our rookie content. Like, we literally had not mentioned his name, so he needed to get out there. But I like Amir Smith-Marset quite a bit.
You know who I got another player who might be even more a breakout candidate.
All right,
also from Iowa,
Ooh.
Also got drafted by the Minnesota Vikings.
Wait,
but he's a running back. He actually came from Iowa State, but he's from.
Oh, okay. I was like, what running back from Iowa? Huh? No, Iowa State. Yeah, I haven't watched much on that kid either. Like, he's fast. Like, he's very fast.
I was watching his tape today. Oh my god! All right, so I'm kind of kidding, kind of not. All right, his name is Kene Nwangwu. I think that's how you say it. Nwangwu?
Once again, you're pronouncing it better than me. I didn't even attempt.
I'm gonna get it before this whole season actually kicks off. I'm gonna get it because I take pride. Like Ngabwale, I love saying. Like,
gotcha.
I can cover all these names, but it takes me a second. No, but sitting there and looking at it, dude, he has a ton of speed. And he can break through some holes. He reminds me a lot of Chuba Hubbard, but without the breaking tackle ability. Just,
sure.
If he sees a hole, he sees it, he goes. He beats people to the edge. But when he goes to juke somebody, he jukes himself out of his own shoes sometimes. Like, he goes to do a move, and he does like a double right-legged hop. He just has that speed to beat people to the edge. What is... Oh,
we got a highlight.
I must have pulled up some highlight film. Where'd it go? Where's that coming from? You... Nope, that didn't work either. All right, so anyways, we're going to end it on this highlight film that I have no idea where I put it up on. This is great. This is great radio. Where the hell is it coming from? I don't even know where it's coming from. So let's go ahead and close out this show.
All right.
Oh, that's because I pulled up my phone. This is great. This is great radio. This is the best thing that's ever happened to me. I don't even think I can hear you anymore because I muted it. There we go. I can hear you now. Anyways, we just lost literally, all of our followers in this. So go ahead, let them know where to find you for those people that listen to the podcast actually can find out. Hopefully we drop that section out.
Yeah, you can find me. You can find me at Dynasty Price. You can find me on the Dynasty Nerds podcast, and basically anywhere you find nerd stuff, I'm probably lurking around somewhere.
Oh God, that's amazing. That's the best thing I ever did. I looked at my history and I'm clicking on an accident. Anyways, you guys can go check us out on Fantasy Intervention, fantasyintervention.com, of course. You guys can go check out all of our stuff on Twitter, FF_intervention, join our circle _. And make sure you guys go subscribe on YouTube, youtube.com/fantasyintervention. We appreciate all y'all coming to support us, of course, and make sure y'all go support Dynasty Nerds as well. They've got some big, big things in the works that I don't think anybody is ready for. I'm excited.
We're excited too, man. We're excited too. It's fun.
Listen, thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you all for listening to our fantasy football advice.